In addition to the charges contained in the indictment, the grand jury found 4 aggravating factors in connection with the murder of A.S. First, that the murder was committed when the victim was less than 14 years old. 2, that the murder was committed when the victim was less than 14 years old and the act was committed in the course of the commission of a violation of New Jersey Statute 2C-14-2. 3, that the murder was committed for the purpose of escaping detection for another offense, and 4, that the murder was committed while Andreas Erazo was engaged in the commission of sexual assault.
It still holds the burden. The defense doesn't hold the burden, and we didn't have to prove anything. This, even with all reasonable inferences given to the state, what we're submitting to the court is that the state failed to produce any evidence, whether it's physical evidence, testimonial evidence through Detective Weiner, that Mr. Erazo was armed at all to sustain count 4 of the indictment as to the level of probable cause.
That under the circumstances, once the victim was escorted into the apartment, the defendant acted quickly to overpower and control her without visible signs of violence. And certainly a large knife, as was described and identified by the defendant, would be the perfect instrumentality of doing that.
When the defendant was asked if he sexually assaulted A.S., he said that he had a tendency to black out traumatic events and would not be surprised if it was determined that he had. Over the course of the investigation, numerous items of evidence were sent to a laboratory for DNA testing. The DNA report issued by the laboratory indicated the presence of the defendant's sperm on a swab taken from the victim's vagina at the scene. Therefore, looking at the evidence in the light most favorable to the state, the grand jury could reasonably infer that sexual penetration took place during the commission of homicide because both the alleged sexual penetration and the homicide took place over the course of a 50-minute period. This court finds that there was sufficient evidence presented to the grand jury to sustain count 5 of the indictment.